I know it's still maybe a little bit early in terms of your sort of formal data. That's a few months away. But are you seeing any early indications of how this year compares to previous years?
Yeah, we are, David. So basically, we're looking at a situation where the forward loads for this Chinese New Year were about 69% below where we would normally see them. And that says that the government attempts to discourage travel to prevent the spread of the virus have been successful. But of course, for airlines, that's a big problem. Normally, the Chinese New Year bump is about 10% of the whole year for China. So this is a serious reduction in revenues.
Right, and as far as domestic travel is concerned, that was expected to be the bright spot for this year. But I'm guessing, based on what you said, maybe we'll have to wait, a little bit more for the data to come through on that.
Yeah, I mean, last year, China bounced back really well after the low point of February. And that sort of continued improvement carried through the year until mid and late autumn. And at that point, we started to see new virus outbreaks. And unfortunately, in fact, the volumes moved backward in December by about 8%. And at the end of the year, we were about 30% below where we were in 2019 for the domestic market in China.
Okay, let's look at this year, and hopefully it is a year of improvement, though. Clifford, we're about a month and a half into the global vaccine rollout. Have you guys started to see any signs of a pickup in future bookings anywhere?
No, not yet. We're really seeing last year was the worst year in aviation history. This year is, so far, we're seeing major lockdowns continuing around the world. And as a trade organization, what we're trying to do right now is work with governments to try and bring tools and means to reopen borders as quickly as we can. In that respect, we're working on what we call the IATA travel pass, where we'll try to reopen the borders and give governments the confidence to reopen their borders when they're ready.
Okay, and that takes me then into the quarantine question in terms of opening borders there. Do you think governments should start excluding people who have been vaccinated? I mean, I'm looking at some of our count here. We're talking over 100 million people, or at least 100 million doses have been administered so far.
Yeah, well, we're hoping that over time governments will be able to exclude people who've been vaccinated from quarantine requirements. But of course, they're going to need the medical evidence to support that. And I guess the other thing that will be a major challenge is how do you validate and certify to ensure that all those people have been vaccinated, they have been tested. And this is where we're developing an application to provide government with the tools to be able to certify and validate and verify the passengers and their COVID-19 health status.
In the meantime, though, what would be then your baseline assumptions for this year in terms of just overall demand? When do we get back to 2019 levels, say?
So we're saying that this year we're expecting baseline to be 50% better than 2020, and we expect to get back to 2019 levels inside 3 years. So that's the current baseline, but it is heavily dependent upon the reopening of borders in the second half of the year.
Okay, yeah, I mean, a lot of this is a moving target, really, and obviously it all depends on how these governments are able to roll it out, as you mentioned. Talk to us then. Do you think by that time, in terms of the number of members you guys have, and I'm getting to a sort of industry consolidation question here, do you think the number of airlines will still be the same, or are we basically on track for some sort of consolidation for the industry?
Well, we've seen some consolidations, for example, in South Korea between Asiana and Korean Air. But I think at this stage, further consolidation is not looking very likely. All airlines, certainly in this region, need government support, and I suspect that governments will want to continue to support the airlines with a view to having an industry there once they reopen the borders. So I think further consolidation at the moment is looking less likely, but it's very difficult to call.
Absolutely. Do you have an idea of maybe what kind of government support might still be needed? Because I imagine that would then be a function of whatever consolidation might come after that.
Yeah, so, well, you saw last week the American government announced $14 billion worth of support for US carriers. That's in the world's largest market. So far, we've seen about $200 billion worth of government support around the world. So we're going to continue to need substantial support going forward if this current situation of closed borders continues.
Are there parts of the Asia Pacific where you see that? You mentioned Korea. Any other place?
In terms of consolidation, no, there are no. There's a question mark over India, where the government is currently trying to privatize Air India. So it remains to be seen whether there will be any consolidation there as part of that restructuring.
Right, and as it pertains, I guess, to where I am here in Hong Kong, obviously Cathay Pacific's, one of the sort of household names here. It's gotten some level of support. How do you think Hong Kong Airlines, as a comparison, I guess, to their mainland peers, how do you think they're doing?
The issue for Hong Kong is that there's no real domestic market, and the carriers that are still seeing inflows of cash are those carriers that have reasonable domestic markets or have a substantial cargo operation. So Cathay is a big player in the cargo side, so it will continue to see benefit from that. But on the international side, it's at a great disadvantage in terms of the international market just not being there at the moment.
And your expectations then for cargo this year?
So cargo, actually, as you probably know, has seen something of an improvement, because the majority of cargo historically has been carried in the bellies of passenger aircraft. So where those passenger aircraft are no longer operating, we've actually seen significant increases in yields for cargo. So cargo operators are doing well. And indeed, the outlook for the manufacturing of things like electronic goods, which tend to travel by air, is also good. So, so cargo is actually one of the bright spots in an otherwise gloomy scenario.
Let me end on something that I wasn't actually expecting to talk about today. That's oil prices, and suddenly, on top of so many other challenges that the airline industry is dealing with, suddenly we're looking at oil trading at 60, 70 bucks. Can the industry absorb this rise in energy prices?
No. I mean, energy, and of course, it's always been one of the weak spots for our industry. We're so dependent on the fluctuation in the price of oil. So it just puts more pressure on the bottom lines of all the airlines at a time when they least need it. I mean, everybody's under financial pressure at the moment. This just adds more pressures.